Hello everyone and welcome to today's Wild Rift video. In patch 6.2 we had the biggest item overhaul that we've ever had, and this mainly affected all the marksmen, all the dual lane champions that want to try and carry games. And I've been asked a lot of questions. What's the new Ashe build? What's the new Zeri build? What's the new Xayah build? So what I'm going to be doing in this video is showing you every single AD carry in Wild Rift and telling you the best build to go. I'm going to leave timestamps in the description so you can skip to any champion you want. And as always, if you enjoy the content on this channel, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, because we're going to be bringing absolute banger content over the next few weeks with all the patch 6.2 content. And I'm going to be going a lot more in depth in other videos, talking about the Varus rework, the Zeri rework, all the new items, and so much more. If you want me to focus on a more specific champion and show you the best build and gameplay for that champion, then leave that champion down below in the comments. But if you scroll through the comments and you see that the champion has already been recommended, make sure you leave that person a like. And the most like comment that I get in this video, I will do a video of showing you all the best build that you can go for in Wild Rifts. Now, enough of me yapping, let's show you all the best builds to run on every single AD carry in Wild Rift patch 6.2. For the first champion, we have Ashe, who also received a mini rework in patch 6.2. Her first ability now is more of a machine gun, where you can stack it 4 times and use it straight away, doing a lot more single target damage. And this also now has 0 cooldown, so you can keep using this ability over and over again. And her passive now scales off of critical strike damage, and that's why the build, as you can see, is going to be more based on critical strike chance rather than on hit. On hit is still an option that you can go for Ashe, but with items like Runa's Hurricane getting a slight nerf, with the AD going down and the spread damage going down, Wit's End also getting a pretty hefty nerf as well, critical strike items have gotten huge buffs, and there's a lot of strong items that you can build on Ashe. We are going to be going Berserker's Greaves as the Boots choice. We still want a lot of attack speed for Ashe, and with the little buff to Berserker's Greaves where your attacks now restore 8 health, it can help you a little bit with sustaining a lane and also being able to heal in team fights. Bloodthirster is still a core item for pretty much most AD carries. The lifeline passive that it receives now means that you have more survivability as an AD carry, but also it still gives the most amount of attack damage outside of Infinity Edge. So building this as a first item for both damage, you also have the inbuilt attack speed now, and also the survivability makes it a core item for most AD carries. Phantom Dancer is now a very cheap item that gives you a lot of attack speed, 40% attack speed, but then you have an additional 25% attack speed when you attack for the first time. This does now scale with your critical strike chance, where if you do crit when you auto attack, it extends the duration by 1 second. And since this has a 20-second cooldown, it's important to build Phantom Dancer with crit to keep the passive ongoing, so you gain that additional 25% attack speeds. Mortal Minder is still going to be a core item for pretty much every single AD carry. This item did overall get a nerf. The AD did get lowered. The cost also went down though by 200 gold, which is not too bad. But now the component is Last Whisper, and you don't have to spend 1,300 gold now on Last Whisper. A lot of people now are starting to build Last Whisper into your third item, or maybe even completely skipping Mortal Reminder as a third item and building other items instead, because you can deal more damage. Of course, this is situational. If you get against a lot of tanks, or if you're against a lot of healing, you still need to go Mortal Reminder as a third item, which we'll be doing in this video. And then for the final item, or the final crit item I should say, we have Soul Transfer, the new item that got released to Wild Rift in patch 6.2. This item is one of the best items for Ashe, and honestly one of the only users that can really use Soul Transfer. There's a few others that I can talk about a little bit later on, but the reason why Soul Transfer works so well with Ashe is because she has inbuilt slow with her auto attacks. It means that the clones don't have to walk as far to be able to catch up and deal the additional damage. Now, one thing to note with Soul Transfer that maybe a lot of people might not understand, but this item does not stack passives, and it doesn't stack any items at all. So you can't use soul transfer, and the clones don't proc Runa's Hurricane, for example. The clones won't proc Vayne passive or Ashe slows. It just counts as a normal standard auto attack, which scales of course with your attack damage, your crit, and also your attack speed. But as I mentioned, it's very good. You have a lot of slows, you have a lot of crowd control with your ultimate as well, and it means that the clones can auto attack more often before the enemies can escape. So that's why we're going for that as the fourth item. And then as your final item, it's pretty flexible. Runa's Hurricane is the best choice if you need even more damage. The spread damage is still very useful for Ashe because you have the slow and you gain this AoE slow. Even though this item did get a little bit nerfed, it's still good to build as a last item. I wouldn't recommend building it as a second item anymore because you have a lot of items which scale with your critical strike chance. You can also go Black Cleaver if you're against more tanks, since your first ability will proc pretty much Black Cleaver straight away from one burst of your upgraded version of your first ability when you auto attack 4 times. More of my Mortius if you're against any ability power damage, and Guardian Angel if you're against any assassins. But most of the time you're going to be going for Runa's Hurricane, and you'll be able to see as well how much attack speed I'm able to get with Phantom Dancer, with my first ability, and with so much attack speed in my build. You can see that you become more of a machine gun, more of a carry now for Ashe, which in my opinion is absolutely great. You also have lethal tempo on top of it as well as Berserker's Greaves. But you can see the clones, they're just standing still for now, but they do eventually move. But you can see here when I auto attack, the clones don't proc the slow, they just auto attack normally and they just crit and do a bunch of damage. So that's a good thing to know if you want to build soul transfer on any other AD carries. As for the runes, lethal tempo is still a great option for Ashe. The increased attack speed is still going to be very important. As I said, now you become more of a machine gun with your first ability, and you kind of want as much attack speed but also attack damage as possible. Brutal for the extra on hit damage. Of course, we're dealing a lot of auto attack damage, so it's very important. You can go coup de grace, but you can also go Giant Slayer. Both of these runes work very, very well. And then you have Legend Alacrity for the extra attack speed with Bone Plating as the secondary rune. If you do want to go for the on-hit build, if you did prefer the on-hit build and you still like the on-hit build because maybe you want a little bit more survivability or a little bit more damage with Terminus, then you can go for Terminus into Runa's Hurricane, Nash's Tooth, into something like maybe Wit's End, even though Wit's End at the moment is a pretty weak item since the nerf. So you can go Wit's End, or you can go something like Bladed Ruin King instead. And then your last item is just flexible again. You can go for more of my Mortius, you can go for Guardian Angel, or you can go for something like Twin Guard. That's the on-hit build if you want to go for that option. But as I mentioned, the main build that you want to go for right now is the full crit build. This is going to allow you to be more of a carry and do so much more damage now with Ashe. Moving on to Caitlyn, her build didn't really change too much. With the removal of Storm Razor, you now have 2 options now as your first item. You can either go for Bloodthirster or Collector. Collector I would only really build if you get a huge advantage in the early game, and if you can snowball, maybe you have a support like Milio and you're able to snowball and get a huge lead in the early game. But most of the time you'll still go for Bloodthirster as that first item. Again, it gives a lot of attack damage. It allows you to have more survivability as well against assassins or any sort of crazy other damage. For the boots, we go for Berserker's Greaves for more AD damage, since we have so much attack speed in this build already with things like Magnetic Blaster and Mortal Reminder, and we still benefit a lot from building more attack damage with Gauntlet's Greaves, since we're going to be dealing more damage with our first ability and also our ultimate. Bloodthirster into Magnetic Blaster is going to be the 2 core items. Magnetic Blaster is a very strong item now because it basically got Storm Razor's passive and the Magnetic Blaster passive that was already on the item, and now this item also gives attack damage, so it's a great item for champions like Caitlyn and also Jhin, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. Of course, Mortal Reminder is in this build, and then we have Infinity Edge. The big thing now with the last item is you have the flexibility now. If you want to be more of a glass cannon carry, you can go for items like soul transfer as the last item, because Infinity Edge now gives you more critical damage when your items exceed over 100%. You can now build a 6th crit item, or I should say, sorry, a 5th crit item. In this instance, I would go soul transfer because it's the best option, you know, out of the rest of the items that you can go for in terms of crit items, but most of the time this won't really be viable. It's really important to go for either Runa's Hurricane or a defensive item. You might be against a lot of assassins, so you need to build Guardian Angel. You might be against a lot of champions that have a lot of AP damage, like Akali, Mordekaiser, and Rumble, so you need to build more of Malmortius. But it's great now that we have the extra option of building another crit item and benefiting from going above 100% crit rate. And of course, Runa's Hurricane still works very well with Ashe's long range, but you can see that if I go for Soul Transfer, we do a lot of damage now, especially with Magnetic Blaster on top of it as well. The auto attacks that we're able to deal every single time is going to deal additional crit damage with also, of course, lethal tempo on top of it as well. Speak of lethal tempo, runes as well, again, haven't really changed too much. Lethal tempo as your main rune, brutal as the auto attack damage, coup de grace or giant slayer depending on the composition that you're after, legend alacrity for the attack speed, and then bone plating as the secondary rune. But Caitlyn, still a great carry to play, still has that long range, is still able to abuse a lot of matchups in the laning phase, but you need to get ahead early to be able to snowball the game out of control. For Corki, you now have two separate builds that you can go for. Do you want full critical strike burst damage with your auto attacks, or do you want to focus more on your abilities dealing more damage? With Essence Reaver now being a Jhin item, it's a great alternative to Trinity Force, and it allows you to build full crit now with Corki and still have the Jhin passive. And that's exactly the build that I'll be recommending for Corki in this video. Gluttonous Greaves is going to be our Boots choice, since we still benefit a lot from our abilities doing more damage with our AD damage, and the Omnivamp also helps us heal a little bit more. But as I mentioned, Essence Reaver now, the big change with Essence Reaver is it now has a Spellblade passive. The difference between Essence Reaver and Trinity Force though is that Essence Reaver works like the old Solari Charge Blade passive, where you can stack it 3 times and now you'll be able to deal additional physical damage based on your base AD. So instead of Trinity Force being one ability and then one auto attack afterwards, with someone like Corki who already spams a lot of his abilities with his first ability and also his ultimate, he can stack this 3 times and do a crazy amount of damage with every single auto attack. And of course, this can critically strike as well. On top of his true damage that he's also going to be getting from his passive, this item is going to be very, very powerful. So we're going to be building that as a first item. For the second item, it's pretty flexible. You can either go Magnetic Blaster if you feel like you need the extra range in fights. Maybe you need to outrange someone like a Caitlyn, or maybe you need to keep your distance against some assassins. Magnetic Blaster is also great, but Bloodthirster is also another good choice as a second item. Again, as I mentioned before already, Bloodthirster gives you that great survivability with the extra armor and match resist, and also gives you a lot of attack damage. Mortal Reminder still as our third item for the armor penetration, and then we have Infinity Edge. You can replace, you know, Infinity Edge for Bloodthirster as well if you want to, but I think Infinity Edge is just way too powerful. Infinity Edge synergizes so well with your passive and allows your passive, your true damage, to crit and deal more damage as well. So Infinity Edge really needs to be a core item in your build. As I mentioned already, with Caitlyn, you can actually use Bloodthirster to exceed the 100% crit cap and get the extra crit damage if you want to, or you can go for something like Guardian Angel of more of Malmortius if you're against any assassins or any ability power damage. But as I said, now you could just stack this ability 3 times. You can see the Essence Reaver Spellblade passive at the bottom. You proc it 3 times, and your next 3 auto attacks are going to do a crazy amount of damage. 580 damage on my auto attacks, plus I'm doing extra burst damage as well with the true damage on top of Magnetic Blaster, giving me extra range. You can see now that my next auto attack is going to deal 790 damage from one auto attack with Blaster passive, my true damage, and also Essence Reaver. So when you combine all of these together, it's going to be very, very powerful. However, you can still go for the old build. I don't think it's as strong as the crit build. I haven't played the crit build too much, so I still need to do some testing. But the old build, of course, was Trinity Force. Trinity Force with Manimune. Then you have, trying to remember the build off the top of my head. it wasn't Rift Maker. Well, what am I thinking? That's the older build with Rift Maker. And then you went Mortal Reminder, Bloodthirster, and Infinity Edge. And of course, you still have the flex of going Magnetic Blaster if you want to as well. This build can still work, but in my opinion, Essence Reaver is now better than Trinity Force. You can go for Essence Reaver plus Manamune as another build option. I wouldn't really recommend this though. This is a bit too overkill in terms of your mana. The big difference between Essence Reaver and Manamune, you're basically going to have unlimited mana and you can use your abilities as much as possible. The problem with Essence Reaver is that you need to auto attack a little bit more to be able to work with the Mana Siphon passive from Essence Reaver, but also you're not going to be able to spam abilities as much. You might be running out of mana a little bit. You need to auto attack a few times to use an ability. So it completely depends on the playstyle that you want. As I mentioned before, do you want more auto attack? Do you want more crit damage? Do you want to focus on your auto attacks more, or do you want to focus more on your abilities? For the runes, these runes actually don't update. I don't know why I didn't say this at the start, but this is giving me default runes every time. That's why I have Coup de Grace in every build, and I don't know why Gathering Storm is here as well, but it's pretty much okay with what's been put here. Conqueror, still going to be the main rune that we're going to be going for. You can stack it very quickly with Corki, with his auto attacks and his abilities. Still very important to give you that extra damage and extra healing. Brutal is going to be used instead of Gathering Storm. Ignore the Gathering Storm, but Brutal is very important to go for, again, for the extra auto attack damage. Coup de Grace or Giant Slayer, depending on the situation of the game. And Legend Bloodline to get more healing in our kit. We don't really need Legend Alacrity. We don't need the extra attack speed. So Legend Bloodline is a lot better. And then Bone Plating as our secondary rune. But Corki now still very strong. It's the same as previous patch. Still one of the best AD carries to play. But now you have this flexibility of being able to go two different types of build. Crit build or the burst damage build with your abilities. Draven is one of the biggest winners in this patch with the changes to Bloodthirster, allowing him to play more aggressive and use that lifeline passive to your advantage. But also Essence Reaver, now having the Solari Charge Blade passive, you can build more attack damage in your kit and do a crazy amount of burst damage. Gluttonous Greaves is still going to be the best option for Boots. It's going to give us the most amount of AD possible, and the Omnivamp is very important for Draven. As much healing, as much attack damage as possible will allow Draven to carry games. Bloodthirster, as I just mentioned, the best item now for Draven. It was already very good in the previous patch, but is now even better thanks to the lifeline passive. Draven is a champion that can sometimes miss position in team fights to try and catch his axes, or you need to play a bit more aggressive. So Bloodline having that lifeline passive is very important to have. Essence Reaver is so powerful for Draven. Not only does your first ability have a very low cooldown, so you can use this to proc the Spellblade passive or the old Solari passive, but every single time that you catch an axe, you can use your second ability. So you auto attack, catch your axe, use your second ability, and auto attack again. And that means that you're going to be proccing Spellblade passive every single time that you auto attack, just increasing the overall burst damage that Draven is able to deal. Then we have Mortal Minder, of course, for the armor penetration. We're always going to have this in our build. And then we have Infinity Edge for the insane amount of burst damage with Guardian Angel, and again, more of Malmortius, depending on the flexibility of your final item. Magnetic Blaster is in here as well, because Magnetic Blaster can still be great, but I think it's very difficult to fit in your build now. So we might want a little bit more attack speed now from our runes, which we're going to be going for. But overall, I think Infinity Edge is very difficult to skip. Of course, you can't skip Mortal Reminder. Essence Reaver is now incredibly strong on Draven. And of course, we need Bloodthirster. So unless you exceed over the 100% crit rate, as I've been mentioning before, you're probably going to be skipping Blaster now as that final item. But as I mentioned, all you do is use your first ability, and look, the Spellblade passive procs. We auto attack, catch our axe, use our first ability, second ability, sorry, catch the axe, use second ability, auto attack again. So every single time, you can see, every single time I'm catching the axe, using my second ability, the Spellblade passive is proccing on Essence Reaver. You can then use your first ability again to get two axes, and then we're just going to be auto attacking with the Spellblade passive every single time. And this is just going to increase your overall burst damage and your carry potential with Draven. And in my opinion, it's one of the best champions that you can play right now, especially in lower elos, especially at the start of the season when you can try and carry games. Conqueror is going to be our main rune choice. The little bit of a buff that happened to Conqueror just gives it that edge, in my opinion. The extra healing, the extra auto attack damage that you deal with Conqueror is just way too good. Brutal for the extra auto attack damage is of course still very important. Giant Slayer or Coup de Grace as your second rune option. Completely depends on the matchup. Legend Alacrity, as I mentioned, we're going to be getting a little bit of attack speed in our runes since we don't have that much attack speed in our build. Legend Alacrity will just allow us to give us that little bit of extra attack speed since we have so much healing already with Bloodthirster and also Gluttonous Grease. And then we have Bone Plating as our secondary option for our rune. Bit of a difficult champion to play. Of course, Draven has a very high skill set, but if you understand how to play Draven, if you can benefit a lot from these new items, as I mentioned, he's one of the best champions to play in this patch. Ezreal now has an alternative to his build that he used to go for before. Manamune is always going to be a strong item and is always going to be your first item choice for Ezreal, but with the addition of Essence Reaver, you can now go crit Ezreal instead of focusing on items like Riftmaker and Soroda's Grudge. Completely ignore this build. I'm not too sure what happens. I'm basically changing the champions from in game, so it's always messing up with my runes and my build, but I'll explain as I'm talking in terms of what build is best to go for. We still want to go for Gluttonous Grease as our boots. You still benefit a lot from your auto attacks and your abilities with Ezreal. The old build, as I mentioned, still works very well, where it was Manamune, Trinity Force, Riftmaker. The new Soroda's Grudge is actually very good for Ezreal because you can slow enemies with your abilities and you can stack up the Frostbite, allowing to bleed enemy champions. And then your last item is always flexible. It could be Guardian Angel, it could be more of Malmortius if you want to go for more of Malmortius as well. That is also a very good option. As I accidentally removed Soroda's Grudge, but you can go for more Malmortius, or you can maybe go for something like Blade of Ruin King if you're against tanks. But the big difference now, as I mentioned, with Essence Reaver coming into the game, you can now build crit on Ezreal. So you can go Manamune into Essence Reaver, and even though I mentioned with Corki that this is a little bit overkill on mana, this doesn't matter on Ezreal. You're going to be spamming your abilities so much, and with this build you're going to be auto attacking so much that you want more ability damage, you want more mana, you want as much mana as possible to spam your abilities and proc your Spellblade passive. After your Essence Reaver, you have an option whether you want to go for Mortal Reminder if you're against tanks, or you can go for Bloodthirster, but you're going to be going for Bloodthirster and also Mortal Reminder. And for the last item, we're actually going to be going for Navori Quickblades. And one of the reasons for that is the second part of Navori Quickblades passive. Your abilities deal up to 12% increased damage based on your crit. So the more crit you have, if you have 100% crit chance, your abilities are going to be doing 12% more damage. And of course, our abilities will already be doing a lot of damage thanks to Manamune as well. You're going to be spamming your first ability a lot. Your second ability is going to be used with your auto attacks, so that's going to be doing more damage, and you could even deal a little bit more damage with your third ability as well. And this actually makes for a crazy Ezreal build. So you can auto attacks do a lot of damage, but also your abilities are going to be doing a lot of damage as well. Of course, this is the damage before the Manamune is fully stacked, but when you stack Conqueror on top of this as well, you're going to be dealing a lot of damage, you're going to have a lot of healing, and you can focus on auto attacks rather than just focusing on your abilities. Sometimes with the old Ezreal build, people were struggling because you had to land your abilities to deal damage because your auto attacks were not doing that much damage. But with this build, you can focus more on your auto attacks rather than your abilities. You still want to use your abilities to proc the Spellblade passive from your Essence Reaver, but as you can see, you don't need to hit them. You could just use them a few times and then auto attack to do the additional damage. Of course, hitting your abilities is a lot more helpful and it's going to help you deal more damage, but overall it's just a lot more flexibility now with the build. Again, ignore the runes. I wouldn't recommend Empowerment. It keeps auto changing for some reason. It's really weird, but I always prefer Conqueror over Empowerment. The reason being, maybe Empowerment can work a little bit better with the crit build, but in my opinion, Conqueror is still very good. You stack it very easily by hitting so many of your abilities, and the extra healing and the AD damage that you get benefits you from both your auto attacks and also your abilities. Empowerment is just single target damage on one champion. If you proc Empowerment, you need to engage after that, but it's very one-dimensional. It's like proc Empowerment, auto attack the champion. If you don't, then you're not going to get much use out of it. Whereas Conqueror, you stack it, and to keep stacks, you just land abilities or hit your auto attack. So you're able to just keep Conqueror stacked throughout pretty much the whole fight, and that's going to give you more attack damage. Doesn't matter what champion you hit. Every single champion that you hit, you're going to be able to deal more damage if you keep Conqueror stacked by using your abilities. Of course, Brutal is still going to be a very strong option for Ezreal, being able to deal more auto attack damage. Giant Slayer or Coup de Grace, any one of these two options work great. I wouldn't recommend Legend Alacrity. I would go Legend Bloodline instead. These are actually, I think, the default runes, so it's actually good that it's showing me the default runes so I can tell you what changes to make from the default builds. I think that's a really good cool thing that I'm actually just realizing now. But Legend Bloodline instead of Legend Alacrity is a lot better. You don't need attack speed that much for Ezreal. You're going to be having a lot of attack speed in your build when you're playing crit Ezreal, or even if you're playing just normal poke Ezreal, you're going to be using your abilities a lot more than your auto attack. So Bloodline is just going to give you a lot more value. I think crit Ezreal might be a little bit better, to be honest with you. I think there's a huge possibility with crit Ezreal being very popular and doing a lot of damage with your auto attacks. But I think it's just to do with, again, different play styles depending on what you want. Do you want to auto attack more with Ezreal, or do you want to focus more of your abilities and keep that distance in team fights? Jhin is another champion that pretty much got a hidden buff in this patch, with Collector getting buffed and also Magnetic Blaster, allowing you to do some crazy damage in team fights and also giving you extra movement speed as well. So it allows you to dodge skill shots, reposition in team fights, and do a crazy amount of damage. We're still going to be going for the same build though. The build has not changed. Gluttonous Greaves is still going to be the Boots choice, so our auto attacks and our abilities still do more damage. Collector with the buff is a must item now for Jhin. Before it was like, do I build Collector? Do I build Stormrazor? Do I build Bloodthirster? There's kind of this decision of what do you want more? Do you want more snowball potential with Collector, or do you want to go for Bloodthirster for more survivability? Now it's just Collector. Every single time it's Collector now. It gives Jhin the most amount of AD because the AD went up, but also we have the flat armor pen on top of that as well. And all you need is a few early game kills to start stacking Collector and allow you to increase that damage threshold and the execute threshold. Magnetic Blaster also now giving you attack damage and bonus movement speed is a crazy strong item now for Jhin, which allows him to, as I mentioned, reposition in team fights and allow him to do some crazy damage. We still have Mortal Reminder in here as well, whether you build it as a third or fourth item. It completely depends on the enemy team comp, and Infinity Edge. These are always going to be your 4 core items for Jhin, and that will not change. Your last item, again, is very flexible though. You have more of Mount Mortius, you have Guardian Angel, again for the assassins and the ability power damage. But with Jhin now, I think Jhin is one of the best champions to exceed the 100% crit cap. And just look, I just want you to look now at the auto attacks. I'm just going to stack Fleet. I'm just going to stack Magnetic Blaster really quickly. I'm just going to auto attack one time. 1,235 damage from one auto attack. And you can even see from the movement speed that I'm able to get now with Magnetic Blaster. My fourth shot just did 1,500 damage. Your auto attacks, when you exceed 100% crits, is doing crazy damage now. Look at that, 1,600 damage from one 4-shot auto attack. Now, of course, you are going to be very squishy and very glass cannon in this build, but because Jhin scales so well with crit, with attack damage, with everything as well, look at that. 873 AD on a single AD champion like Jhin. I think if you have an enchanter support by your side, like maybe a Lulu or a Milio or Soraka or anyone like that that can help with your survivability, going for 5 crit items now is a very strong choice for Jhin, and I think it's definitely going to be the way to go in this patch. But again, it completely depends on what enemy champions you're up against. For the runes you just heard me mention, Fleet Footwork is still the best option for Jhin for the movement speed and for the extra damage that you're able to deal. Brutal with your auto attack damage. I would say Gathering Storm can be better than Brutal since Jhin doesn't auto attack as much, but I think with Brutal you're more to do with Snowball. You want to try and snowball in the early game and want to benefit more from auto attacks rather than landing your abilities. Giant Slayer or Coup de Grace, both of these runes depending on who you're up against. If you're against more tanks, of course you go Giant Slayer, and instead of Legend Alacrity you should swap to Legend Bloodline. I think Jhin still has this weird bug. Oops, as I accidentally closed the game. I think Jhin still has this very weird bug with attack speed where he's not converting it correctly. It's kind of the same with like attack speed boots as well. It's very weird how the interaction with attack speed and Jhin work and how Jhin works. So that's why I just build as much AD as possible, and that's why I much prefer Legend Bloodline over Legend Alacrity, we also have 0 lifesteal in our kit. So the Legend Bloodline giving us that extra bit of Omnivamp is going to help us with survivability in team fights. But Jhin overall, very strong champion still. Like I said, basically got a hidden buff this patch because of the changes to Collector and Magnetic Blaster. These 2 items being core items for Jhin to be able to carry in your games. Not really much has changed for Jinx. She's still a hyper carry. She still wants to build a lot of attack speed, and she still wants to spread damage from Runan's Hurricane, being very important to try and get resets now on your passive. And when you get resets on your passive now, you now restore mana. So you can use your rockets and your abilities much more often in team fights, which I think is a nice buff and a nice quality of life change for Jinx. Gluttonous Greaves is still going to be our Boots choice for the extra AD, to allow our rockets to deal more damage, but also our abilities to do more damage as well. Bloodthirster is now an even better item for Jinx. Since you don't have a lot of mobility with Jinx, it's very important to go for Bloodthirster to make sure that you have that extra survivability and also the extra auto attack damage. You can go for Runan's Hurricane as the second item, or you can go Magnetic Blaster as a second item. I still like Runan's Hurricane as an item, even though this item technically got nerfed for Jinx because the range of the bolts got reduced. And also you now just do more single target damage, which Jinx doesn't really want. You want to do a lot more AoE damage to try and get takedowns for your passive. But the item still synergizes very well with Jinx and still works very well with how she wants to play. Magnetic Blaster is also still going to be a very strong item. As I mentioned before, you get the extra movement speed now, which is going to help Jinx allow her to move and dodge in and out of team fights. Mortal Reminder for the armor penetration. Most of the time with Jinx, you're going to build this as a 4th item because you need the attack speed from Runan's Hurricane and the Magnetic Blaster. So Mortal Reminder is probably going to be delayed most of the time to that 3rd item. And then you have Infinity Edge as the 5th item. Because Runan's Hurricane doesn't have any crits, that's going to be our flexible item in this build. So we can build Infinity Edge as our last item to be a great carry. But like I said, nothing really changed with Jinx. She's pretty much the same champion as what she was in the previous patch. Nothing has changed at all. She's still doing it, be able to deal a bunch of damage. She's still going to be able to be a great carry, but I still think she is kind of hidden behind Enchanter supports. She needs Enchanter supports to be able to carry in her games. If she plays with tank supports, it's not going to work as well. Lethal Tempo is still the main rune choice to get up the stacking attack speed, and again allow her rockets to auto attack faster and deal with the AoE damage with Runan's Hurricane. Brutal for the extra auto attack damage is also still very important. Coup de Grace or Giant Slayer, depending if you're against tanks or if you're against a squishy comp, and Legend Alacrity for more attack speed, with Bone Plating being the secondary rune choice. If you have an Enchanter on your team, if you have a Lulu, a Soraka, a Milio, or a Yuumi, Jinx is still a great carry choice for you to play and try in 1 versus 9. You're going to be a little bit weaker in the early game, but once you get up to 4 items, I think you have great potential to be able to carry in fights and be that late game demon and that late game bully that Jinx can be. For Kalista, she now has a new build path with her critical strike damage. She can now benefit a lot from all of the crit items, Bloodthirster, Phantom Dancer, and the new item Soul Transfer. But just before that, I'm going to show you the new on-hit build. This build can still be a possibility and you can still go for on-hit. I do think it is going to be weaker now than the crit build, but you can still go for this build. Terminus as your first item. The big thing now with Kalista that I want to mention is because Dragon and Rift Herald timer got delayed from 5 minutes up to 6 minutes, you can now complete Terminus before the dragon spawn. Before, it was a little bit difficult to complete Terminus because it was quite expensive, but now you can complete it before the first dragon. The same with pretty much any other item in the game now. If you want to build it as a first item, you can complete this before the first objectives, which is a huge buff for Kalista. Of course, with this build, we go for defensive boots since we have a lot more survivability and we still have a lot of damage anyway with the build with Terminus. Runan's Hurricane is still going to be very good for Kalista. She now deals more single target damage with the new passive, but now instead of Wit's End, we now go Nash's Tooth and we focus more on getting more ability power. Wit's End, like I mentioned with the nerf that happened before, I don't think the Wit's End is a very good item. I would only really build this if you're against 2 or 3 champions that deal ability power damage. Other than that, I would skip that and just go Nash's Tooth instead, because Nash's Tooth is just going to give you so much more damage output. Rift Maker is still going to allow you to heal a lot and do more damage damage in team fights, with Twin Guard being that last item. But with this build, you have 170 ability power and 146 AD. So you are still focused on your auto attacks, dealing a lot of damage because you're going on hits, but you also have the ability power, which can proc on your passive and do more damage, and also allow your second ability to deal more damage as well. But this is when the spice comes in. Critical Strike Xayah is the new way to go for Xayah, and there's a few different ways that you can go about this. You are going to go for Bloodthirster as that first item. No surprise, I've already mentioned plenty of times, Bloodthirster is a very strong item on a lot of AD carries because of the survivability, which is of course very good for Xayah because she has very low range, and when she's diving into the backline, she can use Bloodthirster very well for the survivability and the healing, but also the lifeline passive. And then for the boots, we actually go for Gluttonous Greaves instead of the defensive options. Gluttonous Greaves is just going to give us more damage with this build. But your second item is actually very, very flexible. There are two different paths that you can head down. You can head down going for more attack speed, or you can head for going for more like burst damage. You go for more AD and you go for more burst damage. If you want the AD burst damage option, then you go for Essence Reaver as the second item, where you focus more on your abilities doing damage, but you focus more on that single auto attack after you use your ability. Now, of course, with this build, you're not going to be having a lot of attack speed at all. You can maybe change Berserker's Greaves for you can change Gluttonous Greaves to Berserker's Greaves if you want to, but I think Gluttonous Greaves is still going to be better. And then with the rest of this build, you of course go Mortal Reminder, and then your fourth item is actually going to be Soul Transfer, which I'll talk about in a second. And then your last item is flexible again between the likes of, Ruinous Hurricane, more of Malmortius, or going for Guardian Angel. Any one of them items work absolutely great with Xayah. The other build that you can go for is where you focus more on your auto attacks, and you go for Bloodthirster into if I can find the item, Phantom Dancer as your second item. This focuses more on your auto attacks and more to do with mobility and movement speed with Phantom Dancer, where you can move them around in team fights more often and you can use your auto attacks to your benefit. I think this build actually works better if you're going if you have an enchanter support, because you're going to be having more attack speed and benefit from items like Ardent Censer and Staff of Flowing Water as well. Then after this, you go for Phantom Dancer, and then you go for Soul Transfer. Now, one of the reasons why Soul Transfer works so well with Xayah is because she has a lot of dive. She dives straight into the back line, and you can do a crazy amount of single target damage. Now, the last part of Soul Transfer says if a clone moves more than 900 units away from you, it will disappear early. So if you auto attack, or if you land an ability with Xayah, say your second ability, or you follow up on crowd control from your allied teammates, then you can ultimate into their backline and auto attack a few times to get the clones with Soul Transfer. So you're going to be doing a lot more single target damage now with Xayah, because you can dash into the backline with Soul Transfer. And as it says, even if you have dummies or you have clones that are standing right next to you that you've auto attacked a few times already, them clones will disappear straight away. So as soon as you use your ultimate, the clone is going to spawn on your next auto attack. Your original clones will disappear and new clones will spawn, because you're going to be most of the time you're going to be 600 units away, which is not that far, to be honest with you. But the 600 units means that you can dash onto the backline with Xayah and her ultimate and spawn the clone straight away. Then of course, as your last item, again, you can go for flexibility with Ruinous Hurricane. But I really like this crit build. I've been using it a few times now on Xayah. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be doing separate builds where I focus more on being able to use the focusing more on basically the builds itself and focusing more on why I go for these builds. But you can see already the auto attack damage and how much damage we can do. The clones is also doing a decent amount of damage as well, which is quite nice. But you have a lot of movement with this build, you have a lot more burst damage, and your auto attacks can also do more damage as well. And because we're going Bloodthirster as that first item, we have the same, if not better, survivability than Terminus before, and we're also doing more damage as well. So that's why, in my opinion, Bloodthirster is going to be a better option, and crit build is going to be a better option now for Xayah than the old on-hit builds. Kalista, unfortunately, is the weakest AD carry to play right now in the game. Because Riot didn't buff her base AD a few patches ago, yes, if you saw that base AD in the patch notes, you're like, oh, Kalista's going to be better now. it didn't actually get added into the game. You'll see if I actually reset my level, Kalista now has still 54 AD instead of 56. So I think it even went up to 58. I can't even remember now. But unfortunately, Kalista did not receive that buff. And that is why Kalista is one of the worst champions right now. And another reason for that is because Kalista can't really go for a crit build. So she doesn't benefit from any of these crazy strong crit items that are currently in the meta. She focuses more on attack speed and dealing more damage with her spears and being able to execute champions with her third ability. I'm still going to show you, of course, the best build though. Berserker's Greaves is still going to be in very important boots for Kalista, and you want to build this first to give your auto attacks more attack speed and allow you to jump a little bit quicker from your passive. Blade of Ruin King is also still a very strong item to go for Kalista. However, you can also go for Runa's Hurricane as a first item if you want to as well. This does have the old or current or kind of similar Rage Blade passive from PC League of Legends. Unfortunately, we don't have Rage Blade as an item, which will be a huge buff for Kalista. Unfortunately, we don't have that, but we have a close enough passive with the Razor Wind passive from Runa's Hurricane. But of course, but now it's a lot stronger for single target damage. But Blade of Ruin King is still very good, especially if you're against tanks. Runa's Hurricane for the spread damage, but also more auto attack damage, more single target damage. Terminus to get armor pen, magic pen, and more survivability. And then we also have Wit's End, with Twin Guard also being the last item. Nash's Tooth is not going to be really going to work very well for Kalista because you don't really benefit a lot from the attack damage or even the ability power. You just want the Wit's End for the survivability. But with Runa's Hurricane kind of getting a nerf with the spread damage, Wit's End getting a nerf, and as I mentioned, with most champions now going for crit damage instead of on hit champions in general have just become a lot weaker. For the runes, you still want to go for Lethal Tempo for the extra attack speed. Of course, attack speed is very important for Kalista to make sure you can put as many spears into enemies as possible. Brutal for the extra auto attack damage. Coup de Grace or Giant Slayer, depending on the situation of the game. Legend Alacrity again for even more attack speed, and Bone Plating as the secondary rune choice. But again, as I mentioned, I wouldn't really recommend picking Kalista in this patch, but if you want to give her a try, then this is the best build that you can go for her in this patch. Lucian is another champion that benefited a lot from some of the crit item changes that happened in this patch. He worked so well before with items like Solari Charge Blade and Magnetic Blaster. Now Magnetic Blaster is even stronger, and now Essence Reaver is part of the Solari Charge Blade passive. It means that Lucian is now going to build more attack damage and deal more burst damage in team fights. For the boots, we still want to go for Gluttonous Greaves as the boots choice to give our abilities and our auto attacks more damage. But now you have two choices to go for as your first item. If you want more survivability, if you're against a lot of assassins and need that extra survivability, then you can go for Bloodthirster. Or now you can go for Essence Reaver as your first item. On top of Essence Reaver now having the Spellblade passive, which works as the old Solari Charge Blade passive, you now also get the Mana Siphon passive, which means that every single time you auto attack, you're restoring mana, which means you can use your abilities more often when it comes to team fights. But it doesn't matter what order you put these two in, just as long as you build these two items first, you'll be able to do a crazy amount of damage and also have the survivability. Of course, Mortal Reminder is in our build as well, but you can skip Mortal Reminder as a third item if you want to go for Magnetic Blaster. As I mentioned, this item got stronger now because of the movement speed and because of the additional AD that you're getting from this kit. And even though you lost attack speed with Magnetic Blaster, you gain attack speed back from Mortal Reminder anyway. So overall, this is a huge win for a build now with Lucian and allows you to do a crazy amount of damage. But there's even more flexibility that you can go for if you want to. I think that this is the best build for sure, and then your last item is flexible, Guardian Angel or more of Malmortius. But if you want even more burst damage, and if you want to be even more Glass Cannon, instead of Mortal Reminder, you can go for the Yordle Seralda's Grudge to get the bleed damage, which will work with your auto attacks as well, and to get the anti-heal on top of that, which is not going to be as reliable as Mortal Reminder, but you still get the anti-heal in your kit. And then you can go for Infinity Edge as your last item. This is the full glass cannon Lucian build, which is going to allow you to do a crazy amount of burst damage. Every single time that you auto attack, you're going to do a crazy amount of damage with this build. You're not going to have Navori quick blades though, which is a big thing. So your abilities are maybe not going to be up as much as before. But with this new build, you do a lot more single target damage and you can kill enemies as quick as what you did before, maybe even quicker than what you used to do before in the previous patch. But one of the reasons why you don't build an Navori quick blades now is, as I mentioned, Bloodthirster and Essence Reaver now gives you more burst damage with items like Magnetic Blaster, IE, and Sorolda's Grudge. But also, the new passive for Navori doesn't really help Lucian too much. With Lucian, you're not really focused on your abilities doing damage, like your first ability and your second ability, even your ultimate. You're more focused on your auto attack dealing damage. With Essence Reaver, when you use an ability, your next auto attack deals damage. Magnetic Blaster as well. You're more focused on your auto attacks when Magnetic Blaster stacks and gets to full stacks. So that's why we don't have Navori quick blades in our build anymore, and we go for a full burst damage build so we can kill a champions as soon as possible. And because of our passive, empowerment is still going to be very powerful because the double auto attacks on our passive allows us to proc empowerment much quicker, and it can allow us to do crazy amount of single target damage. Brutal for the extra auto attack damage is very important, and it works on both auto attacks with Lucian's passive. Giant Slayer or Coup de Grace, depending on the situation of the game, is very powerful. And then we have Legend Bloodline for even more healing and survivability in our kit, with Blown Plating as our secondary rune. But Lucian is still one of the best champions when synergized with Nami or Braum. Nami, your auto attacks work with Nami's third ability, and you're both super aggressive champions that you can really take advantage for in the laning phase. And Braum, you can always, I was going to say now you can proc Braum's passive, but you always could anyway. You can proc Braum's passive with your auto attacks as well, being able to stun champions, proc empowerment, and do a crazy amount of burst damage with items like Essence Reaver now giving you the Solari Charge Blade passive. Your burst damage is unlike anything else before. Out of all the AD carries in Wild Rift, Miss Fortune right now has the highest win rate over in China. She's dominating laning phase with some of the new items and some of the buffed items, and she's also doing crazy damage in team fights, and this is the build that you want to be running on her. For the boots, again, ignore this build. For the boots, we're going to go for Gluttonous Squeeze for all the attack damage and the Omnivamp for the healing that we are able to do during the laning phase, but also just gives us the most damage overall during the laning phase as well. And we're going to be going for Duskblade as our first item. Duskblade was already very strong for Miss Fortune in the previous patch, but now it's just gotten even stronger. With Duskblade now, you gain invisibility, which is very strong. The AD went down a little bit, but that's completely fine for Miss Fortune because the first passive Night Stalker works with Miss Fortune's first ability. So if you use your first ability on a minion, then bounce it to an enemy champion, it will proc the Duskblade passive, which is very, very powerful with how Miss Fortune wants to play during the laning phase. She wants to play aggressive. She wants to bounce her first ability as much as possible off of minions and deal as much damage as possible. And then we're going for Collector, another buffed item in this patch, more AD and more scaling potential with the passive. Then after that, you want to go for Mortal Reminder, of course, with the armor penetration is very important for Miss Fortune. And then we go for Bloodthirster and Infinity Edge. Both these items are going to give you a crazy amount of attack damage with Miss Fortune. Bloodthirster AD, the Infinity Edge AD, Duskblade AD, and Collector as well. These are some of the highest AD items that you can get with Miss Fortune. She's not focused a lot on her auto attacks. She got a little bit of a change with her passive, where now you deal more burst damage when you auto attack or use your first ability 3 times on the same champion, which is going to help a lot. But of course, it's all down to her first ability and her ultimate in team fights as well. And just look at this, her ultimate here. Just look at that damage. One full ultimate scale. I wasn't even able to do all the damage to the dummy there because I basically executed him right at the end with Collector as well. But the burst damage is absolutely absurd with this build. However, if you don't want to go for Duskblade, there are other options that you can go for. If you want to focus more on using your auto attacks, you can use Essence Reaver as your first item instead and just get rid of Bloodthirster. Essence Reaver, of course, has the Solari Chargeblade passive now. So every single time that you use ability, your next auto attack is going to deal increased damage. So you can go for that, and then you can go for this type of build, Collector, Mortal Minder, and even Infinity Edge, and maybe even go for Bloodthirster and exceed that 100% crit cap, or you can go for, you know, flex item as your last item. But I think this build is much better where you can go for Duskblade as the first item and have that big one item power spike for Misfortune. For the runes, you don't want to go for Fleet Footwork, you actually want to go for Conqueror or First Strike. First Strike is if you want to get a really big lead during the laning phase. If you're against champions, if you're against melee champions especially, say you're against an Alistar support, Brom, a Leona, any type of these supports, you can prop First Strike on them very easily by bouncing off your first ability, or even champions like Lulu or someone like that, where you can walk forward and use your third ability and your first ability to try and proc First Strike. But I do like Conqueror though, because you're stacking AD a lot during team fights, and it's giving you more sustained damage during team fights, where First Strike is more down to the burst damage, the single target damage that you get, which can also be good. Again, it's pretty flexible. First Strike or Conqueror, both of them really work. It just depends what type of damage you want and how confident you also feel with Misfortune. I think if you're a new Misfortune player, you go for Conqueror. If you're an experienced Misfortune player and you know how to use their first ability, then you can benefit from First Strike and use that to your advantage. Brutal is going to be the rune choice, of course, instead of Gathering Storm, because the auto attack damage is very important. Coup de Grace or Legend Alacrity, Giant Slayer, depending on which rune choice you want to go for, will depend on if the champions have more squishy champions or champions that have a lot of HP. Legend Bloodline for the healing, and then Bone Plating for that secondary rune. But as I mentioned, Misfortune right now, the highest win rate at the moment over in China. I think she has like a 56% win rate right now over in China. Crazy play rate as well, like 22% play rate. So definitely, if I was to recommend a champion in this patch, it would 100% be Misfortune. Samira's build didn't really change too much, but again, she benefits from the changes to Bloodthirster and also the buff to Collector. You now have a bit of flexibility with your first item. I actually think Bloodthirster might be better than Collector, and the reason for that is you're just unkillable if you build Bloodthirster now on Samira, because when you're jumping in with your ultimate, you're proccing that lifeline passive. You have so much healing with Bloodthirster, and you also gain armor and magic resist as well. So yes, Collector can have more snowball potential and probably deal more damage as well, thanks to the early armor penetration, and maybe help you get a few more kills. Bloodthirster just helps a lot with the survivability. But before that, of course, we're going Gluttonous Grease, because our abilities and our auto attacks are going to do a lot of damage. Again, you can decide which first item you go for depending on what you want. You know, do you want more snowball potential? Do you want to go Collector? Do you want to be a little bit more safe? Then you can go for Bloodthirster into Collector. Of course, we have Mortal Minder for the for the armor penetration and the extra crit damage, and then we go for Infinity Edge as our last item, with Guardian Angel being a flexible item, or more Mortius, depending on what you want during the game. If you want to exceed 100% crit, you can probably go for something like Navori Quick Blades as your final item, because it means your abilities will be able to deal more damage, which is kind of nice. Other than that, there isn't really any other crit item that you can go for Samira, since you already have all the AD crit items here. So most of the time, you just go for Guardian Angel for the survivability, or more of Mount Mortius. Samira is a champion that benefits so well when you're playing with tank supports that have crowd control, because you can follow up with your abilities and your auto attacks and keep stacking your passive over and over again. If you keep stacking your passive, you get to that S rating and you do a lot of damage with your abilities. And of course, with Collector as well, with Collector you're able to scale if you get more kills, and if you keep killing over and over again, that stacking of Collector is just going to keep raising up. So the execute threshold is just going to get bigger and bigger and allow you to finish off kills much easier as well. For the runes, we have Conqueror, still a great rune choice for Samira. When you get that S rank, when you get your ultimate, Conqueror is always going to be fully stacked. So Conqueror is a must for Samira. Brutal for the auto attack damage is very strong, especially during the early game if you want the snowball potential. Coup de Grace or Legend keep saying on Legend Alacrity, Coup de Grace or Giant Slayer, depending if you're against a squishy comp or a tank composition, and then Legend Bloodline for the extra healing that you get in your kit. As for the secondary rune, you can go for bone plating. You can also go for sudden impact as well. When you use your third ability, you're going to be able to do a crazy amount of damage, but if you want more survivability, you can go for bone plating instead. But you have the flexibility of more damage with sudden impact and more true damage, or more survivability with bone plating. Sivir really hasn't changed at all. She's the same champion as what she was before, and also her build hasn't changed as well. Her build is pretty much the exact same as what you had before. Gluttonous Grease as your first item. Bloodthirster, of course, still a first item for Sivir. Gives us that extra bit of survivability. Gives you a little bit less AD, but now you have the guaranteed attack speed, and also you have the lifeline proc if you do drop low on HP. Now, Navori Quick Blades, even though you don't benefit too much from your abilities doing more damage, Navori's Quick Blades is just a must. Being able to reduce the cooldown on both your first ability, your second ability, and even your spell shield as well is just crucial for Sivir to be able to carry in team fights, but also have the survivability at the same time with her spell shield. So even though she doesn't benefit much from her abilities dealing more damage, it's still going to be a core item for her. Then we have Mortal Reminder as well for the armor penetration, and then you have a bit of flexibility. Do you need extra range in your kit, or do you need extra survivability, I guess, with Magnetic Blaster, or do you just want your abilities and auto attacks to do as much burst damage as possible? Then you can go for something like Infinity Edge. The reason why Infinity Edge works so well is because it works with every single proc of your second ability. So when you use your second ability and bounce around in team fights, and it bounces around to the backline, that's going to deal increased damage every time with Infinity Edge. So it's really important, if you want to deal as much damage as possible, to go for Infinity Edge, but Magnetic Blaster is still another great option if you prefer to have the range and the survivability instead of having more burst damage. And then you have the flexibility again of Guardian Angel, of more Malmortius, but you can also go Black Cleaver on Sivir. As I mentioned, with the bounces of the second ability, every single bounce works as a stack towards Black Cleaver, so you can reduce the armor of the frontline champions, but you can also reduce the armor of backline champions as well, just allowing you to deal more damage and allowing your team to do more damage in team fights. But overall, as I mentioned, Sivir, pretty boring this patch. Nothing's really changed. She still has a very weak early game. She's probably one of the easiest and safest AD carries to play, because you just clear the wave and you just sit in lane and wait for the next wave to spawn on in. But when it comes to team fights, when she gets a few items, as long as you have a front line in front of you, you need front line with Sivir. She can't be standing at the front alone, or you can't be with a lot of assassins in your team. You need a front line if they're standing in front of you and you're sitting behind them using your second ability, bouncing around your blades. Then you can bounce them all the way to the back line and do a crazy amount of damage. As for the runes, we're still going to be going for lethal tempo to get as much attack speed as possible in our kit. Just auto attack more often with our second ability, so it can bounce around a lot quicker. Brutal for the extra auto attack damage. Coup de Grace or Giant Slayer, depending if you're against tanks or squishy champions, and then Legend Alacrity for even more attack speed in our kit. Sivir loves attack speed and loves as much damage as possible. Again, once you get up to 3 or 4 items, you do a crazy amount of damage. And then you have bone plating as well for the extra bit of survivability and the extra resistances to be able to survive a lot of the burst damage that might be on enemy champions. Tristana, again, is a champion that hasn't changed at all. Her abilities didn't change, and also her build didn't change as well. We're still going to be going for Gluttonous Grease for the extra damage with our auto attacks, but also being able to deal more damage with our third ability. Bloodthirster as the first item is going to give Tristana more survivability and allow her to play more aggressive. You can try to jump in now with your second ability and trying to deal more damage and try and get your reset in team fights. And the same reason as Sivir as well, she's still going to be going for Navori Quick Blades. Again, the same with Sivir. You know, Sivir before with her first ability, her second ability bouncing, and her spell shield on her third ability. Tristana is the same. She wants her third ability as much as possible to deal as much bomb damage as possible, but also the same with her first ability. When you use your first ability with Tristana, if you auto attack enough times, your first ability is going to come back up again when your first ability ends, which means you're going to have this constant extra attack speed in your kit. So it's just super vital to go for a Navori on Tristana. It's going to mean that her third ability can deal more damage, which can be quite nice, and also a second ability. But again, the value of Navori is not to do with your abilities dealing more damage, but it's to do with the Death Strikes passive reducing your non-ultimate ability cooldowns. Then you have Magnetic Blaster for the extra range, and now you gain extra movement speed, which can work quite nice. Mortal Reminder for the armor penetration and also the extra AD and the attack speed. And then of course your flexible last item being Guardian Angel of More of Mortius, or you can go even more crazy and go Infinity Edge as the last item. I think Tristana is another champion that you can go for this glass cannon build, because Tristana has one of the longest attack ranges in the entire game, with a Magnetic Blaster on top of that as well. And even if you have someone like Milio on your team, Lulu on your team, Soraka, Yumi, any of these champions that can help you with survivability, Tristana can do a crazy amount of damage now if she exceeds 100% crit chance. You can see my attack range. It's one of the longest attack ranges in the game. And even when I have Magnetic Blaster, I can basically auto attack this guy all the way back from base. And then my third ability now is going to be able to deal more damage. You still have the extra attack speeds, but you can see here, I'm going to activate my first ability and I'm going to auto attack him a bunch. Look, my first ability comes back available before it's even ended. And that's why Navori Quickblades works so well with Tristana, because you can use your first ability more often, and you can even use your third ability more often as well. Look at this. I'm using my third and my first ability. After a few more seconds, I have them both back up again, so I can just keep on auto attacking. So that's why I feel like with the extra attack range, with maybe the survivability or having an enchanter support on your team, you can go for this crit style build. And as for the runes, we're still going lethal tempo. Lethal tempo also gives you extra attack range as well, which is also quite nice, and extra attack speed. Brutal for the extra auto attack damage. Coup de grace or giant slayer for the damage, whether you want damage against tanks or damage against low health champions. Legend alacrity, I think you need it with the extra attack speed. You don't need extra healing because you have Glutton's Greaves and Bloodthirster, and then Bone Plating giving you more survivability in your kit. Tristana is always going to be a late game champion with great carry potential, with a little bit of a weaker early game, but if you have an enchanter support by your side, she's one of the best carries to play in the late game, and one of the safest as well. She has higher attack range than Caitlyn. Just keep that in mind. When you level up your abilities, when you level up Tristana, the more attack range she's going to be able to get. And she has more attack range than Caitlyn. So if you thought Caitlyn had a lot of attack range, then you can try and go for Tristana and have the same late game carry potential. If not, maybe even more. Twitch is another champion like Kalista who is pretty underperforming at the moment. Again, with Twitch, most of the time you want to go for the on-hit build. You want to go for as much attack speed as possible to benefit from Twitch's ultimate. But with Twitch, you can also go for a crit build now. There is two alternatives that you can go with Twitch, which makes it a little bit more viable. But I still think Twitch is a little bit too hard to pull off compared to other champions that can build critical strike chance. I'll show the crit build first. So we still want to go for a Berserker's Greaves, because we want more attack speed and as much attack speed as possible. I like Collector as the first item for Twitch, because you can have that snowball potential. Twitch is a champion who is a bit of a rat. He's very sneaky. He can go around the map stealth, and if he can surprise the champion, he can get early kills in the game, and this allows Collector to snowball, and you can start stacking the execute threshold of Collector, which is very nice. You then have Rune's Hurricane to spread your auto attack damage. This works extremely well with Twitch's ultimate, being able to spread his third ability and allow his poison to deal more damage. And then we have items like Mortal Reminder to go for the armor penetration. Bloodthirster for the survivability is also very good. And then we have Phantom Dancer. Phantom Dancer gives us even more attack speed afterwards as well. You also have the possibility of going for Soul Transfer. One thing I actually wanted to test is if the ultimate of it doesn't really work. I was thinking the ultimate of Twitch would actually increase kind of the attack range of the clones. Maybe it does. Maybe if I auto attack normally, no, they still stand in the same range. It doesn't actually matter. They just stand the same range anyway. Yeah, they have to walk up before they auto attack. Well, maybe it is a bit of an extra attack range. Let's find out. Let me reduce the CD a little bit. Let me auto attack with ulti. Okay, it actually does work. Wow, that's interesting. So Soul Transfer actually works when you use Twitch's ultimate. So when you use Twitch ultimate, it actually gives your Soul Transfer clones more attack range. So that's another option that you can go. Instead of Phantom Dancer, you can go for Soul Transfer as that other item, and it's going to give your clones extra attack range because Twitch's ultimate works as a normal auto attack. So this is a build that you can run. I think this build can, does have big possibilities and can be run very well, and can be a good opportunity for Twitch to be able to carry. But again, I just think his damage output, it's just not really there at the moment. In terms of the other build, the on-hit build, you go for the same build as before with Terminus, Runa's Hurricane. You go for either Wit's End or Nash's Tooth. I think Nash's Tooth actually might just be a better item now for on-hit Twitch, because you can go for more ability power, because you can go for Nash's Tooth. And then on top of Nash's Tooth, you can then go for Rift Maker as well, which is going to mean that your AP damage and your damage from your passive is going to be able to deal more damage, because your passive scales off of your ability power. So you can go for this type of build where you go Terminus, Runans, Nash's Tooth, Rift Maker, or even, I would say even better, it's better to go Terminus for Runa's Hurricane, sorry, first item. And even delay Terminus, because the spread damage of Runa's Hurricane is so important. And if you want more AP damage, you can go for Nash's into Rift Maker, and that's going to be your best option. And then after that, you can go for Terminus, and then a defensive item like Guardian Angel, or maybe even Twin Guard can be pretty good on Twitch because you have longer attack range. But this is kind of the on-hit build that you want to go for with Twitch. But I think the better build to go right now is going to be this crit build. I think it has a lot of potential, and now I know that Soul Transfer works with extra range now with Twitch's ultimate. I think it has great potential. Like, look at this. This is going to be, I think it's going to be absolutely crazy with Twitch, actually, the Soul Transfer item. But we'll have to wait and see. I haven't played Twitch yet in the new patch. I've just been testing out a few things in practice mode. I didn't test Soul Transfer for some reason because it didn't cross my mind. But there you go. That's the possibility that Twitch can get in this patch. As for runes, nothing's changed with Twitch again. Lethal Tempo is your main rune for the extra attack speed and the extra range with Lethal Tempo as well. Brutal is going to be very important for the extra auto attack damage. Coup de grace or Giant Slayer, depending if you're against tanks or squishy champions. Legend Alacrity for the extra attack speed, and Bone Plating for the survivability. But Twitch again is a champion that needs to have an enchant support by his side. Again, a Yuumi could be very powerful because Yuumi works with Twitch with his invisibility, or someone like a Lulu or even a Milio. Imagine Milio range with Soul Transfer and Twitch ultimate. Has potential to have crazy potential, I think, with Twitch being a carry in late game team fights. Varus got a huge rework in patch 6.2, and I am still seeing so many people building Essence Reaver, Trinity Force, and Rift Maker for Varus, and this is completely wrong. It is a terrible way to build Varus now. Not only did the Essence Reaver item get completely changed, so you don't have the extra ability damage anymore with Essence Reaver, but also because his abilities have changed, his passive and especially second ability especially, it means that his build has now completely changed. And you now want to build Varus on hit with as much attack speed as possible. This does, however, mean that Varus is going to be weaker in this patch. I mentioned already with on-hit champions, especially because you can't build crit items, on-hit items are going to be weaker. But because with Varus's new passive, with attack speed, the more attack speed you have, the more AD and ability power you get when you kill a minion or when you kill a champion. Now, this doesn't infinitely stack. It only stacks with your attack speed. It doesn't stack with how many minions or how many champions you kill. If you kill a champion, then you gain the additional AD and ability power it shows. Now, if I just quickly lock in the full build for you and just show you what you can actually get and what the items and everything looks like. If I go for Nash's Tooth, if I can find it, I go for Rift Maker with the ability power, because Rift Maker and AP in general is still very good with Varus. And then I go for Guardian Angel. You can see now that my passive numbers have changed. So now, if I got a kill now without auto attacking, I get 27 AD and 27 ability power. And then if I get a non-champion takedown, I get 19 AD and 18 ability power, or 19 AP and 19 ability power. I'll quickly show you how the passive works. I'm going to do a video which is going to be a lot more in depth, but I'll basically show you how it works anyway. So you kind of want to ignore this number at the start, this 27 and this 19. So my AP at the moment is 80. If I kill a jungle monster, you can see my AP goes up to 103 because I'm gaining 23 AD and 23 ability power. And you can see that this passive Living Vengeance is at the bottom. So you get 23 AD and AP for as long as you can kill a champion or a minion. If you kill a champion, if you kill a minion, you're going to be able to get more AD, the same AP and the same AD every time. So your auto attacks and your abilities are going to do more damage. And that's why you need to go on hits now. And you need to make sure that you go on hit and you don't go Essence Reaver anymore. You don't go Trinity Force anymore. Because like I said, that is a huge mistake. And of course, with the on hit build, we want to go for Berserker's Greaves instead of Gluttonous Greaves, because with Varus now, we're focusing a lot more on our auto attacks. Terminus is our first item to give us AD ability power, but to also give us that survivability. The one reason why Varus right now is not performing very well is because he has very limited survivability. He's one of the easiest AD carries to kill. He has no way of escaping. He has no dashes. He has no help really from his team at all. He only has his ultimate, but his ultimate can only CC one champion in front of him. But if other champions jump on top of him, it's really easy. And also, he just doesn't have a lot of burst damage as well, because he's going for this on-hit build. Ruinous Hurricane for the spread damage, of course, and with our auto attacks and with the kind of newish Rage Blade passive being put in there. As I mentioned before, with on-hit builds, Nash's Tooth is a lot better now than Wit's End, but you can go for Wit's End if you want to. It can be an alternative item if you don't want to go for Nash's Tooth, but both of them work pretty well. And then we go for Riftmaker. Varus's second ability now scales a lot more with ability power, and especially with your passive auto attacks. Your passive auto attacks are now going to do more damage based on more ability power. So we're gaining ability power from Ruinous Hurricane, we're gaining ability power from Nash's Tooth, and we're also gaining ability power from Riftmaker. So our auto attacks are going to do more damage, and our burst damage with our Blight attacks are also going to do more damage. So again, more focused on AP and attack speed. And as for the runes as well, I think that's everything I've pretty much explained. Like I said, I'm going to go in depth with another video explaining the abilities and how they work more often, but that's just a basic rundown. For the runes, of course, don't go Phase Rush. Phase Rush is not good anymore. For the runes, you want to go for Lethal Tempo now instead, because you're more of an on-hit champion. You want as much attack speed as possible. And of course, if you stack attack speed with Lethal Tempo, this will work towards your passive. If you're stacking Lethal Tempo, you're stacking attack speed from any other sources of attack speed as well. Say you gain more attack speed from Lulu building Ardent Sensor, that will also work towards your passive, which means when you kill a minion, a monster, or you kill a champion, you're gaining more attack damage and ability power in that team fight. Then we go for Brutal for the extra auto attack damage, Giant Slayer, or coup de grace, depending on what rune you want, depending on what enemies you're up against. Legend Alacrity for the extra attack speed, and then Bone Plating is going to be the secondary choice for the rune. Another reason why Varus is not performing very well at the moment as well is because you need to get a kill, or you need to kill a minion or a champion for your champion to actually deal damage. If you're starting off a team fight and if you didn't kill a minion beforehand, you're losing out on a lot of AD. You saw the amount of AD and the ability power that I got from just killing a minion. Imagine if I had Lulu by my side with the passive. Imagine if I had Lulu attack speed, Lethal Tempo attack speed as well, and I kill a champion. I'm probably missing out on a good 60 AD and 60 ability power. So with Varus, you need to make sure you kill a champion first. You don't play as aggressive, but as soon as you kill that first champion, you go all in, because your damage is going to be out of this world. As I mentioned already, building crit on AD carries is now a lot more beneficial than building on hit items. And that's going to be now the same for Vayne as well. Vayne is now going to be able to deal crit items and build crit items, because the crit items are now so powerful and give her more attack speeds. We of course are still going to be going for Berserker's Greaves as our boots choice to give us a lot of attack speed, but now we want to go Bloodthirster and Magnetic Blaster as our first two core items. These can be swapped though. If you need more wave clear in the early game, Magnetic Blaster now allows you to deal more damage to minions. If you need more wave clear in the early game, which can be definitely Vayne's weakness in the early game, you can go for Magnetic Blaster as the first item. But Bloodthirster now, with that survivability with the lifeline passive, is so good, and now you have guaranteed attack speed with Bloodthirster, which is very, very powerful for Vayne. But Bloodthirster plus Magnetic Blaster are always going to be your two core items. Then after that, this is where the flexibility comes in. Trinity Force is still going to be a great item if you combo this with Phantom Dancer as well. If you build this as a third and fourth item, this is going to give you a lot of attack speed and a lot of continuous damage during team fights. I would normally do this if you're against a lot of tanks, because the movement speed is going to help you a lot with Trinity Force, and also the attack speed, so you can benefit more from dealing true damage with your second ability. However, now instead you can go for Essence Reaver as a third item, because Essence Reaver has that Solari Charge Blade passive. You can now deal more burst damage, but you are going to be lacking a lot in attack speed until you get Phantom Dancer. Essence Reaver as a third item, I think, is going to be completely fine. Again, it's more to do with burst damage. It's to do if you're against squishy compositions. If you can use your abilities a lot, especially your first ability and your second ability, you're going to keep proccing that Solari Charge Blade passive, which is going to be really important. I should say the Spell Blade passive, but you get what I mean. And then for your final item with this build can be Trinity Force if you want full Glass Cannon, or Twin Guard is very, very powerful for Vayne compared to other champions, because Vayne has very low attack range, so she's in melee range a lot, so it's important to get that survivability. But if you want to go for Trinity Force as the third item into Phantom Dancer, you can then build into Twin Guard to get 75% crit chance. I normally don't like this, but I don't mind it in this build because Trinity Force is such a strong item, and again, you need at least one defensive item, I feel like, for Vayne to have that survivability. But if you want to, you could just go for another crit item instead. Now, the big thing is you cannot build Trinity Force and Essence Reaver in the same build. Both these items have Spell Blade passive, so you can't go for these two items in the same build. So you have to find another item instead, which could be something like Soul Transfer, especially could be very, very good. I'm pretty sure that's like the only other attack speed item that you can really go. So you can see you're kind of stuck a little bit because Vayne is a champion that doesn't have long attack range, so Soul Transfer might be a little bit difficult to pull off. So that's why you go for Twin Guard as the last item, or you just go for Essence Reaver and you just go full crit instead of Trinity Force. Both of these can work very, very well, and it can allow you to do a lot of crit damage. For the runes, of course, we're still going to be going for Lethal Tempo, because Lethal Tempo is very important to make sure we get even more attack speed. You can kind of see the attack speed that I get here if I auto attack. I'm going to have Phantom Dancer stacked, my Lethal Tempo stacked, and my second ability as well. So you can see there the attack speed that you're able to get. Still quite nice attack speed. Of course, it's going to be more with Trinity Force, but you can still do a bunch of burst damage. Brutal, of course, with the extra auto attack damage is very important. You can use this in lane phase to help you win some duels early on. Giant Slayer or Coup de Grace depend on the composition of the enemy team. Legend Alacrity for even more attack speed, and then Bone Plating as that final rune choice. Vayne is always going to be a champion, though, that works well with enchanters. You never want to build Vayne with tank supports, because that's just never going to work. You need enchanter supports, you need that survivability, you need that healing and shielding for Vayne to stay alive and for her to be a carry. Once she gets 3 or 4 items with this new crit build, she's going to do a lot of burst damage. Xayah actually got the biggest buff out of any AD carry in this patch, and I'm not just saying that because Xayah is my main champion, and Xayah is my main champion to play and is one of my go-to champions. I've reached rank 1 Xayah multiple times during Wild Rift's history over 4 or 5 years. But one of the reasons why Xayah is so strong this patch and why she got the biggest buff is because of Navori Quick Blades. Your abilities dealing that extra damage based on your crit works on your feathers. So now when you're dealing damage and you're dishing out all them feathers, when you pull them all back, they're all gonna deal additional damage, which means that Xayah is gonna have crazy burst damage potential in this patch with this build and how you're going to run it. Now, this isn't the build. You'd have to ignore this again because it's kind of scuffed. I think what it does with the recommended build is it takes your top build, but my top build is not always my build that I run. Sometimes my second and my third build, so it kind of messes up in game. Anyway, Gluttonous Greaves is a boost choice to make sure that our feathers do more damage and our auto attacks do more damage. We have Bloodthirster still for the survivability. It's another reason why Xayah is very strong. She already has a lot of survivability with her ultimate and her feathers, but Bloodthirster gives her even more survivability. On top of that, Navori Quick Blades as a second item, 50% crit chance, 6% bonus damage now on our abilities. Our first ability is going to do more damage, our ultimate, but more importantly, our third ability is going to be able to deal more damage as well, which is absolutely crucial with Xayah's kit. Xayah's kit is all revolved around her feathers. You know, you need to make sure that you deal as much damage as possible with her feathers. As the third item, you don't go for soul transfer. You go for magnetic blaster as the third item to give you extra attack range and the movement speed, so you can reposition in team fights and pull back the feathers to deal as much damage as possible. And then of course you have mortal reminder to make sure you get the armor penetration later on in the game. And then you have the flexibility of guardian angel. You have more of Malmortius, you want to go for that option, or if you're feeling really ballsy, you can go for Infinity Edge. And look at the damage you are able to deal with your auto attacks and your feathers. Watch my feathers. I'm going to try and do as many feathers as possible. Watch the pullback here. Boom! Over 1,000 damage just dealt with my feathers alone, thanks to the Vori quick blades and the buff that got. And you can just imagine how that is in team fights. Xayah is one of the safest champions to play. As I mentioned, the survivability of her ultimate, be able to become untargetable. You can pull the feathers back to stun enemy champions. You have so much survivability in your kit to deal as much damage as possible. But with so much attack speed now in your build, if you think about the build, Bloodthirster, attack speed, Navori Quickblades, attack speed, Magnetic Blaster, attack speed, Mortal Reminder, attack speed, you now want to run Conqueror instead of Lethal Tempo. And this is going to actually mean that your feathers are going to deal more damage and you're going to get more AD when you're stacking up your feathers and when you're auto-attacking during fights. You gain more damage and you gain more healing and more survivability. We don't need Lethal Tempo anymore for Xayah. We already have enough attack speed in our kit with Navori Quickblades getting attack speed, with Bloodthirster now getting attack speed, and Mortal Reminder as well. These are three items that didn't really give attack speed before. Bloodthirster kind of did, but it didn't guarantee it every single time. But now with three items given attack speed, we can go Conqueror instead to just deal more damage. Brutal for the extra auto attack damage is also very nice, just to make sure we deal more damage in team fights. Coup de Grace or Legend, or keep saying Legend Electricity, Coup de Grace or Giant Slayer, depending on the situation of the game. You can go Legend Alacrity. I think this is okay to go Legend Alacrity in your rune, so then you can benefit a little bit more from the attack speed, and you can get a little bit more attack speed in the mid game. I think Legend Alacrity is completely fine here because you already have healing from Bloodthirster and Gluttonous Greaves, as the game has just ended because I've been recording this video for so damn long. And then as you saw, we had Bone Plating as the final option as well. But Xayah overall is going to be one of the best champions in this patch. You need to make sure that you give her a try, use her feathers to her advantage, pull them back when possible as well. Make sure you're using that new Navori Quick Blades passive to your advantage, and you'll be able to do a crazy good job in any game of Wild Rift. And finally, we have the reworked Zeri. Not really too much has changed actually with Zeri when it comes to her abilities. It's just that her first ability has a bit more flexibility now, and you can last hit on minions to restore the mana and reduce the cooldown. Her third ability now does a bit more burst damage when you use it, the next first auto attack after you use it. And her ultimate now, you don't need to hit multiple enemy champions with your ultimate to get the enhanced version of her ultimate to deal more damage and get more movement speed. Now you need to only hit one person with your ultimate, and after you hit that one person, you then auto attack to gain the extra stacks of movement speed and damage with her ultimate. And her build has also slightly changed as well. We're going to be going for Berserker's Greaves, and the reason why we're going for Berserker's Greaves is because we're actually going Conqueror on Zeri. This is much better than the alternative of going Lethal Tempo over Lethal Tempo with Gluttonous Greaves. The big thing with Zeri is that she wants a lot of attack speed straight away at the start of a fight. And with the build, as you can see, the build that we're going, our first 2/3 items, we're not going for a lot of attack speed. So we're actually going to be lacking a lot of attack speed. So instead of relying on Lethal Tempo and relying on us to auto attack champions, which can be a little bit difficult, of course, with Zeri, because Zeri's auto attacks are skill shots. So it can be a little bit difficult to auto attack. If you don't add auto attacks, then you're going to have basically 0 attack speed during fights. So you can go for Berserker's Greaves to gain the burst of attack speed at the start of the fight, and of course the extra healing with the passive, and then go for Conqueror instead to get more healing and more AD, so then your abilities can also do more damage. And then we have Bloodthirster as the first item. Zeri has one of the lowest ranges in the entire game for AD carries. And Zeri is still a champion that wants to dash forward and make sure she can hit her ultimate onto one champion. Her ultimate doesn't have the biggest of range, so you need to stand pretty close to make sure you at least hit one champion. So which sometimes means you might stand too close and you might get caught out, which means that lifeline passive is there to help you out. And then we go for Essence Reaver as the second item. Solari Charge Blade was a very strong item for Zeri in the previous patch, and that means Essence Reaver basically is even better for Zeri now. Zeri was okay with attack speed before. Of course, with Zeri before in the previous patch, you would run Conqueror, Solari Charge Blade, and Gluttonous Greaves, but now it's a little bit different because we don't have attack speed in our kit. We go Berserker's Greave instead, but now we have more AD or with Essence Reaver, and now our Essence Reaver is going to deal more damage. So it's really great that Solari Charge Blade passive is still in the game, means that Zeri can still do more damage. Then of course we have Mortar Reminder as well, which is very, very nice. And then we have Soul Transfer as the final item as well. Soul Transfer actually works pretty well with Zeri. It's actually kind of nice. As you can see, it only has one auto attack, but kind of similar to how Kai'Sa works. When you use your third ability, if you use your third ability, let's say like Overwall or something, let's say you auto attack here, use your third ability Overwall and you stand far enough away for the clones to go away, you can then auto attack a champion over here if you want to, and then the clones will spawn right next to you. So it's kind of similar to Kai'Sa in a way, where Kai'Sa benefits a lot from mobility and dashing around a lot during fights and getting really close to enemy champions, and that's why Soul Transfer can also work very well with Zeri. And then for the final item, we always want to go for Ruinous Hurricane. Ruinous Hurricane still works very well with Zeri because it spreads her bolts, it spreads her damage very well, but you still have the flexibility of going something like more of Mortius or Guardian Angel instead. And then for the runes, I've already mentioned already, but we're going Conqueror because we have Berserker's Greaves and we want more damage with Conqueror. Brutal in our kit to get more auto attack damage off is very important. Giant Slayer or Kugra, depending on which which enemy champions you're up against. And then Legend Alacrity also gives us extra attack speed. So it gives us attack speed from Boots. We have attack speed from Legend Alacrity. We also have attack speed from Bloodthirster, Mortal Reminder, and also Soul Transfer. So eventually we will have enough attack speed in our kit where we will basically reach the limit for Zeri, which is actually, I'm curious to see what the limit is going to be, because we might not reach the whole limit with Zeri because the limit is 1.5. I'm curious. Oh no, we do hit the 1.5 limit. Yeah, I thought so. So we hit the 1.5 limit with Zeri. Zeri has a very strict 1.5 attack speed limit. If you read her passive, Zeri's attacks are capped at 1.5 attacks per second. So once you go above 1.5 attack speed, you're going to get more damage. But of course, but then if you don't have 1.5 attack speed, of course, it's just going to be able to, just stack as well, because you've got attack speed in your kit. But with all of these items, the attack speed is capped at 1.5, and then at this point, Lethal Tempo becomes pretty useless. You gain more AD, but the big thing with Conqueror is you gain more AD and survivability thanks to the healing as well. So it's really nice to have that extra survivability and the extra healing in your kit to make sure that you can survive, because Zeri has such low range. And a bonus champion I wanted to cover is Nilah. Now, Nilah never gets played in the dual lane, and I would completely avoid playing Nilah in the dual lane. Her attack range is so short. She basically is not really a marksman, but she builds like a marksman. That's why I kind of want to show you the build for her. And one of the reasons I want to show you that is because she's actually considered one of the strongest junglers right now. She farms pretty decently, she has decent jungle clear speed, and once she gets to 3 items, she has one of the best late game carry potentials of any other jungler in the game. And this is the build that you want to be running. You go for Gluttonous Greaves as your boots choice, so your abilities and your auto attacks do more damage, and you have the Omnivamp. And the kind of the same with like Samira, the same with Vayne, the same with Zeri. All these low range AD carries got a pretty huge buff in this patch because of Bloodthirster now having a lifeline passive, but it still keeps that 50 AD, that really strong amount of AD that you had before, which is so important. And now with the Navori Quick Blades, your abilities are going to be able to deal more damage. So your third ability, your first ability, and your ultimate are all going to be able to deal more damage. And of course, with Navori Quick Blades, you're reducing the cooldown of your non-ultimate abilities, so you can use use these abilities more often. Mortal Reminder for the armor penetration, and then the Infinity Orb for the Infinity Edge, sorry, for the crazy amount of burst damage, with either Guardian Angel or Mortal Reminder being your flexible items. And as for the runes, you want to run Fleet Footwork instead of Conqueror. Fleet Footwork just helps you better with jungle clear speed in the early game. It allows you to double auto attack, which just helps you clear your jungle a little bit quicker. As I mentioned, Nilah has decent jungle clear speed once she basically goes through her first jungle. She might have one of the slowest first jungle clears, but after that she gets pretty strong. So I definitely recommend to run Fleet instead of Conqueror, and also you have enough damage in your kit anyway, so you don't need even more damage from Conqueror. Gathering Storm is better than Brutal in the jungle because you don't want to fight early game. Nilah is a champion that just wants to scale, wants to farm until 3 items, so Gathering Storm is just going to give you more damage than Brutal by that time. Coup de Grace or Giant Slayer, depending on the enemy composition, and then Legend Alacrity for the bit of extra attack speed. You can also go for Bloodline if you feel like you need more survivability, but Legend Alacrity normally works best because we don't have too much attack speed in the kits, but we do have a lot of healing with Bloodthirster and Gluttonous Grease. And then for the final room, you go for Overgrowth instead of Bone Plating, because we're playing jungle Nilah. Means we go for Overgrowth, and Overgrowth is going to give us more HP over time, which gives us more survivability. Good in the jungle, really good in the jungle, to be honest with you. Definitely avoid Durin in the draw lane. You don't want to play her in the draw lane. Avoid her completely, but you can maybe give her a try in the jungle. Now, before I end this video, I want to talk about a few other things as well. First, I want to talk about the Boots Enchants and what Boots Enchants you should be building on your AD carries. Most AD carries will go the same Boots Enchants. You either have Stasis, Quicksilver, or Gale Force. They are basically the only 3 Boots Enchants that you can build on AD carries. I actually think Gale Force is the weakest of the 3. Yes, it's a dash. Yes, it can give you more damage, but it doesn't actually help you with surviving in team fights. Building something like Stasis to block a lot of damage and block a huge amount of burst damage, or building Quicksilver so then you can survive any crowd control that comes your way, is a lot more valuable than going for something like Gale Force. The one way I would say that Gale Force is better is if you want to play more aggressively. If you're ahead and if you're snowballing during the lane, and if you want to play aggressive and if you want to dash forward during team fights to deal more damage and get into auto attack range, then you can go for Gale Force. But for some more survivability and for more outplay potential, it's a lot better to go Stasis or Quicksilver. And finally, let's talk about summoner spells. Every single AD carry that I've shown you today is all going to run Flash. Flash is just the go-to for most champions in Wild Rift. Being able to flash away to safety, being able to flash forward is always going to be very important, especially for squishy carries, squishy marksmen like, Kai'Sa, like Ashe, like Zeri. You always want to go Flash to have that bit of survivability. But the flexibility really comes in with your second summoner skill choice. Now, you can go Cleanse. Cleanse is a great example if you're against a lot of crowd control. Morgana, as you can see on screen, is a good option. Nautilus is a good option. Brom, Nami, Olaf, Vi. There are so many champions that you can actually benefit a lot from with Cleanse. And that's why in most games, I run Cleanse over any other summoner spell, because it just gives me that more survivability that I need if I get hit by any crowd control. And of course, if you cleanse this crowd control, it means you can auto attack more often, and it means that you can deal more damage in fights. But there are a few other options as well. Exhaust is very good if you're against champions and assassins, especially if you're against champions that have a lot of burst damage, champions that like to jump on top of you. You can run exhaust to exhaust enemy champions and reduce their movement speed and also reduce their damage. This is also very good if you want to play aggressive in the 2v2 in the bot lane. If you're playing someone like Samira, Nautilus in the bot lane, you can run exhaust to try and win that 2v2 in the bot lane. And the other option is barrier. Barrier is all to do with really long range burst damage, I would say. If you're going to get hit by like a Lux ultimate or anything like that, or Morgana tries to use your pull to try and kill you or anything like that, you just get surprised by damage, then barrier is going to be great for you. You might be against a Lux, you might be against a Syndra that has a lot of burst damage. Any champions that have a lot of burst damage and a lot of ranged burst damage that you can't walk into range to exhaust them, then you just run barrier instead. Exhaust is for more melee champions. Barrier is more for range burst champions. But that's pretty much it for the summoner spells. You don't really want to run anything else. Ghost, in my opinion, is not very good. You can run Ghost on maybe some champions that might benefit from movement speed, like maybe the long range of like Caitlyn, for example. It could be pretty good, or maybe Tristana. Other than that, I don't really like it. Teleport, you never want to run. I don't like teleport at all, because teleport, you don't have a combat summon spell, so I'd much rather go for something else instead. And heal, your support most of the time goes heal anyway, so you don't actually want to go heal as a marksman. So that's pretty much it for the summoner spells, and pretty much it for this video. And if you did enjoy this rundown of every single marksman and what to build in the new patch for Wild Rift, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And as I mentioned at the start of the video, if there's a champion that you want me to focus on in this new patch, leave a comment down below. But if your champion has already been commented, make sure you leave that person a like, and the most liked comment will be a video that I will do for this patch. So until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next Wild Rift video. Peace.